Welcome to the Focus on Why podcast. I'm Amy Rowlandson and I ask my guests one simple question. Why? Focusing on the importance of why, I share with you the relatable, uplifting and inspiring conversations I have with people from all walks of life. This podcast will encourage you to focus on your why to enable and empower you to achieve the success you desire. Have a purpose, have a plan, focus on why. Today on the Focus on Why podcast, I am joined by Alisoun Mackenzie. Alison, welcome.
Oh, thank you so much for having me here, Amy.
Well, it seems a long time since we last spoke. It was back in the sort of wintry months. We were on Clubhouse together, and I just wanted to share why you do what you do after a conversation that we had in a room one day.
Oh, it's just fabulous to be here and to be part of your journey with this podcast as well. I really enjoy the show. So just quite a thrill to be here, really.
Well, thank you very much. So why don't you share with the audience, what is it you're doing at the moment?
So what I'm doing is I work with women over 40. And I've seemed to have found myself in this field of being a bit of a champion for women over 40 who want to create a more joyful, meaningful life that lights up their heart and leaves a legacy that they are proud of. This was a bit of a pivot that I did because I'd had a couple of years off after struggling with fatigue and what I then realised was actually menopause. I had been in the healing world, well-being world before becoming a business mentor and then more laterally a business for good leader. But I realised that when I took the time out, I just wanted to really connect into what was really important to me. And the one thing that I think is important to all of us, and that really is that the biggest thing that's important in life is our impact. You know, the impact our decisions have on ourselves, how we touch the lives of others and the planet while we're here. And so that was the start of a new journey for me and a bit of a pivot for the business too.
So what is it about the impact, and firstly on self and then on others and then on a global perspective? How is it that you can fold all of those into a lifestyle and a life choice?
I think it's about taking the time to reconnect into what is important to us. You know, this focus on why. It's really getting clear on what is important to you right now. Because as we go through that journey of life, it does change. You know, life events change us as human beings. But when I started to look back at what I had done throughout my life, and I think of the earliest thing when I used to watch a TV program called Why Don't You Just Get Out of Bed and Do Something Useful with Your Saturdays instead? And I used to love that program and think, oh, I'd love to do that. And it was all about trying to encourage people to make the most of life. And then fast forward, I'd given up a career as a stockbroker and gone off traveling and came back. And again, I set up one of the UK's first travel clubs. And the intention of that was about making the most of life. It's just at that point, it was for 20-something-year-olds who loved to travel, you know, because that's where I was in my life. And then I continued in the investment world for a while, but took redundancy back in 2003. And for me, that was when the meaning piece really was starting to kick in, because I'd had a successful career. And I was thinking, well, so now what? You know, I want to do something that is more meaningful. It was the time when I was beginning to accept I was probably going to be childless because we hadn't had children during my first marriage. And it was coming to that conclusion point, really, and getting to that point where I really needed to move on and to accept. And I think for somebody who is involuntarily childless or who becomes that, the meaning question maybe hits us in a slightly different way and happens sooner because, you know, certainly I felt there was just this deep hole in my heart that I was trying to fill. So that sort of took me on a bit of a journey. And then the menopause piece is kicked in because it's one thing that's making me feel I'm quite angry about the lack of correct information and support out there for women and the injustices that are happening around women of a certain age just now. So that was my journey. the common thread has always been, or more recently been, about making the most of life and finding meaning and how we can make a difference. And I think for me, that big part of that comes from because I felt there was a part of me which wasn't being nurtured or used, particularly because I hadn't had children.
And how did you fill that deep hole in your heart?
For me, it started off with, I remember the day I sat and I just finished a contract, a training consultancy contract with a large global bank where I'd come back from India. And it just felt soulless again. It might have been through my own business, but I just felt like I was selling my soul again. And I left them that day. I just suggested that they maybe didn't need me anymore. I'd put everything in place, so it seemed like a reasonable conclusion to the work that I'd done. And my sister said to me that day, what are you going to do then? And I said, I don't know, but I just know it needs to involve something around children because that's a gap for me. It needs to involve something around my skill set because I've always watched news coverage of wars and natural disasters and felt a deep urge to go and help, but not felt I had the skills to do that. And so, like many others, I would donate money, but it never felt that I was really making the difference I wanted to make. And the third thing that was more of a choice was travel. And then 3 days later, the very next day, I got an email in my inbox about a project in Rwanda doing trauma healing with young genocide survivors. And they were looking for other people to support the project, which was, they'd been invited in by the government over there because there was a great need for trauma healing in that country at that point. And so I just reached out and ended up in Rwanda six weeks later. And I'm saying that it was an incredible experience. I'm saying that now with the wisdom of somebody who's done a lot more work on things like white privilege and white saviorism and how damaging it can be to go off and volunteer nowadays. I was very lucky. I did it with a project where we were filling a critical need after humanitarian tragedy, where the government was, they were seeking our support, which is very different to other forms of volunteering overseas. But still, I've definitely got different filters on that now. But that was the start for me of filling that hole in my gap, hole in my heart.
So that was the start of a journey that has taken you to where you are now. You said it was all about the wisdom. It was easy to you can look back and see the learnings and with the hindsight, and that role in the bank had felt soulless and you just knew that it was right. Was this a gut instinct or was it a thought process that you spent a lot of time sort of ruminating about?
I suppose that day in that bank where I walked away from that particular contract was a gut instinct. I mean, I just walked in. It was the first day back after a trip to India where I'd been training lots of people. And I just walked in and the energy, everything just felt heavy. And I just thought, I just cannot do this anymore. That in itself was 6 years after I'd taken redundancy from the investment world. So it was actually just part of a contract, if you like. It was a big contract that I had. The bigger decision came the previous time when I took the redundancy, because at that point I'd been the business manager for an investment company and we were shutting down the whole subsidiary and I was involved in those negotiations. So we had about 3 years notice and I had that time to really be thinking about what do I want to be doing for the rest of my life. And I remember whenever promotion time would come up, I would cringe at the thought of ever becoming the director of an investment company. And I don't say that with disrespecting anybody who's in that role, because we all have different destinies. But for me, that did not fit with my values. And for me, that was really a bit of a telltale sign. I used to get embarrassed when people said to me, "What do you do?" I used to wish I had something that felt I was contributing more to share. So that process, yes, had gone on for a number of years, but that had happened prior to 2003.
And what was it that you said you were quite angry about the injustices of women of a certain age? What was the trigger point for you to sort of work into the area now where you're a champion for women?
It was actually just at the end of last year that I probably became more angry. I'd started to move away from serving a mixed audience that I did when I was a business mentor. Probably about 2 or 3 years ago, I was making moves. I was telling my clients behind the scenes. It wasn't necessarily what was happening on the outside from a business perspective, but certainly I was having those conversations with clients. And I just felt at that point there was something that I was missing in terms of it. I was so ill at that point, and there were days that I could barely function. There were days I could barely get out of bed. And I'm used to being a high achiever. I was used to run all the time, and probably too much. So this was completely alien to me. But I always think there has to be a solution, because there was nothing obviously coming up through clinical tests to say there was anything physically wrong with me. So, having ruled that out, I was thinking, what is it? And when one of my friends, who's a nutritionist, actually suggested a book to me called Estrogen Matters. And by that point, I'd already started to, through lockdown, I was already starting to provide support to women over 40. I'd set up a Facebook group called Women Over 40 Rocking the World. So I was beginning to move into that space. And I read this book, Estrogen Matters, which completely transformed my views and opened my eyes to the possibility that maybe what I'd been going through wasn't just fatigue, wasn't just that burnout or adrenal fatigue, because I had had a couple of years off trying to heal. And I looked into this and realised that this could actually be menopause. And having been somebody, I've been brought up to seek natural solutions to everything. There was one stage in my early 20s when I was blacking out. I actually lost my driving license at the time because medically they thought it was a rare form of epilepsy. And I was diagnosed, I was put onto medicines, which was against everything I believed in. I went and saw an expert homeopathic doctor. I'd been brought up on homeopathy. And thankfully, they reversed the diagnosis, said it was a rare form of migraine, and actually spoke to my specialist, who reversed the decision and got my driving license back. So I've always been quite anti what I think of as medicine. So I'd been quite anti even considering that I might have been menopausal, that any thought of an HRT was just no. And that book helped me see things differently. And I just became curious and started actually looking at the reality. And there was a report that came out in 2003 by the World Women's Health Initiative, which was misreported but picked up on the press, which really has scared so many millions of women off HRT and even exploring if it's right, because it's not right for everybody. But I think it's made a lot of people very scared about what menopause is. So, I certainly put my head in the sand, and that opened my eyes, and now I see things differently.
So having gone from watching Why Don't You Just Get Out of Bed and Do Something Useful Instead to not being able to get out of bed, to then wanting to get out of bed with meaning, what is it that is now getting you out of bed?
What's getting me out of bed is knowing I am making a difference to women, but to women who want to make the most of life, who have had enough of not feeling they're able to, or are actually maybe just at a transition point. And the other thing that really excites me, probably the thing that excites me the most, but it's more of a passion project now, is that I lead groups of women who raise funds to sponsor schools in Asia. So we are building schools made of recycled plastic that is turned into almost like big Lego blocks. So in doing that, we're cleaning the oceans, we're cleaning the islands, we're providing local jobs, and we're building these wonderful earthquake-resistant plastic schools that children won't be scared to go into. So that's the connection again around that children and really feeling like I'm making a difference, because these are we're part of a project of over 200 schools that were destroyed in the Lombok earthquake in 2000 and I want to say 2015, but I've also been speaking to somebody about a Nepalese earthquake recently, so it might be 2018 for Lombok. But yeah, so the schools were destroyed. So we're part of another humanitarian project, and that really, really excites me, because again, that brings together the usefulness, but doing it in a way which is respectful of local cultures. We're providing the money rather than, there's no volunteering happening, there's none of that going on. and looking at ways that we can be responsible global citizens, really supporting others who need the help right now.
And there's a couple of things I want to explain. Why would the children be scared of going into school?
Because when the earthquakes happened, so many of them were in schools. And I mean, there were a lot of lives lost as well, and most of these were up in the north of Lombok in very, very remote communities. So they have actually rebuilt some schools using brick structures, but the children are too scared to go in. But what happens with these Lego structures is amazing. If you think about just, toy Lego, there's the gap between the bricks. So there's a little bit of flex within the buildings. And actually, our school's the second in the world built with this technology. And the local governments across Asia, they're looking at how you can use the same technology to replace homes destroyed in earthquakes. So it's part of a really exciting project.
That's amazing. And the other one was around there's no volunteering involved. What does that mean?
So that's my reference, I suppose, to my views now on anybody who is white or passes for white volunteering overseas. I no longer believe it is appropriate to volunteer overseas unless there's a critical emergency happens where certain skills are needed. So definitely after wars, natural disasters, probably even during pandemics, this kind of thing, where there is a shortage of skills and people are invited in to provide that critical aid, which may happen in a few days straight after an event. It could actually be 10, 20 years down the line when it comes to something like trauma. But the idea that, and a lot of people want to do this, to go over and for instance, volunteer in schools in Africa, we're almost going over and doing things, assuming there's a need, which there may not actually be. We're assuming that our way of doing things is better than they would do over there. Most likely, probably not. And it causes all sorts of other damage, let alone going over and volunteering in schools. Schools are educational establishments. And when I'm speaking to people, I say to them, well, how would you feel if tourists from another country were popping in and out of your children's classes to say hello or to teach them a random topic that they wanted to share? We wouldn't tolerate it. And yet, for some people, they want to do that. And I think part of that is culturally, we've been brought up to think it's a good thing to go and do good in the world. But that's the white privilege and white saviorism beliefs that we are continuing to feed. So for me, I've done a lot of unpacking. There are, of course, still times when it is appropriate, and there are ways in which people who are white and pass for white can get involved. It's just that now I choose to do it through raising funds and only supporting projects which are where they partner with the local government and local communities and take the lead. So for instance, our school that we're building wasn't scheduled to be the next school, but the locals have said that the most critical need happened to be the one that we were sponsoring. And even though that throws a spanner in all our fundraising efforts, we're saying, you know what, we've got to listen to the locals. They're the ones that are on the ground and know what's most critically needed. So it's doing what they want, not what we want. That's important.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I can see how it could have been overlooked as something that people think they're trying to help, but actually it can almost do more damage than not.
Yes, so it can do more damage than good. And so because I was getting asked by so many people about this topic, I do actually have a couple of blog posts around not being white saviours and the damage we can do through volunteering overseas. So more than happy to share those with you, Amy, so you can share them with your listeners.
That'd be fantastic. And you talk about the white sort of saviorism there. Is it also about throwing money at it? Can that also be a hindrance?
It depends on the project, to be perfectly honest, because it all comes back to, there's lots of different things to consider when we choose who to actually support when it comes to charitable giving. There is no doubt that there is great need. It's a lot of it, however, though, is in our mindset. So, it's the intention behind the reasons we're giving and allowing that help shape the decisions we make around how much we give and what we give. So it's one of the reasons that a lot of the charities that are, making a big difference, they quite often do say, just give us the money. It doesn't mean that the big charities are necessarily always the best ones around impact. But another thing to be mindful, I do hear people talk about, I want to make sure my money gets to the people on the end, on the ground, and not into administration and salaries and things. Whereas I actually believe that that's almost upside down. I don't get why we would pay people lots of money to do damage in the world, and yet we don't value those who are doing good. I actually believe we should be paying people who work for charities, social enterprises, and are doing incredible work. I believe we should pay them well, and we should have the systems in place, especially for things like distribution and logistics, which is very costly overseas.
Absolutely. So impact is your focus.
Yeah, definitely.
And are you waiting for this travel ban to lift?
Well, interestingly, you see, last January, before the travel ban, I was on my way to Cambodia because we'd built a school out there, and I was taking a team out for a trip to Cambodia. On the way out on the plane, I was writing my consumption pledge on what I was going to do to minimise my impact on the planet. And one of the questions was around travel, as I was sitting on a plane. And because the type of aid I seem to do does involve overseas travel. So yes and no. Travel is my number one passion, but I've actually been really surprised at how right now I'm not really that fussed about going overseas. I'm very conscious that I want to make smarter choices. So for instance, rather than going over lots of times, I might go over once a year. That will be enough. And I would tag on a number of different activities around that. If I was running a retreat or something to do with the projects I was involved in. But I don't see the need to travel nearly as much. And I used to go to conferences in the States all the time. And I used to just, travel all over the place for the business, and no. So I'm looking at cutting travel down a lot, but making smarter choices about the decisions I'm making around that.
Brilliant. So focusing on impact and the lives of others, and of course the planet, and whilst you're doing great work building the schools, you're also managing to clean up the oceans as well. Where is this taking you? What's the sort of big vision?
For the first time in my life, I don't have that big vision, and I feel so good about it, because I would say particularly the last 10 years of my business, maybe not the 2 when I was ill, but before I got really quite ill, I was I was building communities, it was global domination, it was off I go with podcasts and books and summits and I just found it exhausting. And now I'm in my 50s, I'm 53, 54 in a couple of months, and we're actually gearing up for retirement. Now, retirement for me isn't going to be stopping everything completely. It will be doing slightly less. And even now, I no longer work full time. I work 4 days a week. And I do take breaks, in terms of weeks off. I do like holidays, even if they're not always overseas. So I'm leaning in and trusting this journey. For me, it's far more about, well, what impact can I have? What really matters to me today? What impact can I have today? As well as, on the day-to-day basis, as well as further away. But again, I'm just leaning into what people are responding to when I'm going out with different offers around, menopause yoga or childless circles, or I've got a program that I run around, living a meaningful life. And I'm just leaning in to see what happens without any being attached to the outcomes. And you know what? That's just so liberating, because I was exhausted before. So, although you have inspired me, you are one of a few people who have inspired me to do another podcast again. I'll just do it in a way that is not so overwhelming as I did it the last time.
So, can you give us any teasers about what it's going to be about, or is that just have to wait and see?
It is going to be about showcasing women over 40 who are doing something meaningful with their lives. So inspiring, fascinating women, giving them somewhere to share their stories and inspire others that it's not all downhill after 40. In fact, I think, especially as we get into the 50s and menopause, it's that second spring. Culturally here, people are scared of menopause, or we think that life is over, or we're all going downhill. But actually, in the East, older women are revered for their wisdom and what they can contribute. And that's what I want to encourage. So again, I think one of the reasons I used to love hosting a podcast was hearing the conversations and the inspiration that comes from other people's stories and seeing where that goes.
Well, I can't wait to tuning in to either inspiring, fascinating women or revered for wisdom, whatever you choose for your title, who knows? But your podcast sounds fantastic. And I love that it is recognizing the journeys, the experiences, the insights that we bring, and seeing how that can then filter through and become that legacy, and a living legacy at what you mentioned that before. It's about championing women who want to leave a legacy they're proud of, but also understand and recognize that they can see some of that already happening before they go.
Totally. And that's a big part of what I work with when taking people through the women. It's actually getting them to write their stories and then to rewrite their stories to recognize exactly what you've just said, because it's how we think about our experiences. And that's I talk about the 9 pearls of meaning, and one of them is how we make sense of the past and the stories that we tell ourselves. And research shows that those that feel a deeper sense of meaning are those that can make sense of their past and see those strands, those commonalities that give them meaning today. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting whenever I'm coaching people and we're talking about things and they've got limiting beliefs, we're talking and we look at the learnings that have come from those experiences, and then I've never thought of it that way, because people always look at the negative outcomes, but they're not looking for the positive learnings.
Yes, absolutely. So true.
Wow. So what brings you joy right now, Alison?
Oh, having fun with my friends. I have definitely learned to do more of that, and probably like many others after lockdown, and making the most of it. I think I'm very, very lucky. I live in a lovely part of Scotland, right on the beach. So actually, there were elements even during lockdown, because I started sea swimming in the North Sea, which I cannot believe I say swimming, dipping. I've never been a big fan of being in the sea, so I dip. It's cold, but I do go in and dip and try to get the 90-second benefits that come from cold sea swimming. But what I have found really amazing doing that was it gave an element of connection through lockdown. Obviously, you had to social distance, but it was classified as a sport. That it wasn't an organised one at that. So we were able to do it, and it's safer to do, obviously, when there's more than one of you. And the women I met, and quite a number of them have become good friends, and it just gave that sense of belonging. But it's just good fun, that camaraderie of women coming together. And most of us are older women, coming together. And that's just been beautiful. So that, and just being creative and adventures. That's what I've replaced travel with, is adventures. We're going on our first camper van holiday in September. It's the 3rd time we've tried to do it because of COVID. And that, for me, I'm so excited. That's what retirement's going to look like for us, hopefully, if I enjoy it, is camper vanning.
Well, I love that you say that you love having fun on your beach, and then you sort of added in Scotland. It's like, it's like we all had this picture of this gorgeous beach, and then it was Scotland with maybe the greyer skies than the bluer ones. But no, I've actually been up. I don't know whereabouts in Scotland are you?
I'm east of Edinburgh, so I'm about 25 minutes on the train east of Edinburgh. So it's just literally beaches from here all the way down to Berwick. It's beautiful.
Yeah, it is in fact, I did that coastline last year when I was visiting with my daughter. We were looking at universities. We went up to St Andrews and we went to Edinburgh.
Wow.
And then we came back down to Durham. So we did that whole sort of coastline view, and it is stunning. It is stunning. So I can still getting the shivers thinking of the cold water, but it is stunning.
Yes, I can't believe I do it, but hey, I look forward to it. Mainly because of the women I go with.
Absolutely. They have to be great company to go through that. But as you said, it's also those benefits of the cold water that it does bring the body as well. It's incredible.
Yeah, definitely.
So joyful life, one with your friends, and creating the legacy and being able to inspire fascinating women and bringing them to the forefront. Is this your legacy?
Thank you so much for saying that in the way you did. I'm going to say yes. We're summing it up beautifully. I will take that one. Thank you.
You're welcome. And that's why you get out of bed every day.
Totally.
Well, how would people get in contact with you, Alison?
Yeah, the best way to find me is on my website, which is alison.com. Really easy. It's got a U in it, so it's ALISOUN.com. You can find me on Instagram, and that's where I mainly hang out, really. And so, yeah, just get in touch if you want to ask or connect about it with anything that I've shared. So, yeah.
Brilliant. Well, any women over there out of 40, Alison is your champion. So if you have any questions, and for any men out there who have a partner or a sister or a friend or a daughter who is over 40 and you think that they may benefit from reaching out to Alison, then she is your lady.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Amy. And thanks to everybody listening to this.
Oh, you're very welcome. Do you have some final words for the audience?
Yeah, I think the final word would be to put your hand on your heart, listen to your body, and step into being the initiator of your life. Because I think that, for me, is what distinguishes people who feel life is passing them by and people that make the most. It's about stepping into that journey and being the initiator of change.
Thank you for listening to the Focus on Why podcast. I'm Amy Rowlandson, and if you've enjoyed this episode, please leave me a 5-star Apple Podcast review. Connect with me on LinkedIn, Instagram and Facebook, and become a member of my inspiring, uplifting and positive Focus on Why Facebook group. I help people to focus on their why with clarity, uniting their passion with their purpose with a plan, to create the life they truly desire. If you would like me to help you focus on your why, then please book a free 20-minute coaching call via calendly.com/Amy Rowlandson. And if you haven't already, please sign up for the Friday Focus weekly newsletter via my website, amyrowlandson.com. Have a purpose, have a plan, focus on why.